For maximum picture quality, it may be necessary to adjust the tracking control on your VCR.
In the summer of 1967, there was only one place to be. The whole country was on the road. Destination, Expo. Canada was growing up then.
The Expo symbol consists of 16 stick-like figures.
It was the coming-of-age party no one will forget. When it was said the past is a foreign country, they must have been thinking of Canada in 1967.
Expo 67 was a moment in the futuristic imagination of the 60s. The whole experience was a model of how we would live, how we would plan urban life on Earth and also on the Moon.
The occasion was a giant bash for the country's 100th birthday. It was called Expo 67. As space age as it looked, Expo came from the grandest of all traditions. It was an international exhibition of the first category. That symbol of France, the Eiffel Tower, was built for such an occasion. So was London's Crystal Palace. Both were wonders of their worlds, great acts of national imagination. Canadians in the early 60s didn't have much interest in that kind of nationalistic grandstanding. It was a country without a national flag, divided between French and English. 20 million people just trying to get ahead. Dutiful, traditional, unspiced. Take Edmonton in 1963.
Most people live in the suburbs. Mostly they stem from Britain. Mostly they're United Church. Mostly they're WASP. It all makes for a pretty familiar pattern of life.
Meat and Potatoes Canada was the Canada of the people, born in the 1920s, after the First World War, people who'd gone through the Depression, people who'd fought the Second World War, and were determined to make a better life for themselves, for their children, where what the bishop and the priest said was what we had to do, and where there were social sanctions to make sure that we stayed in line.
Meat and Potatoes Canada couldn't believe the audacity of the Expo dream. Montreal's mayor, Jean Drapeau, announced his plan for the site on the banks of the St. Lawrence River. Canada was going to become just a little bigger with the construction of artificial islands in the middle of the St. Lawrence. Prime Minister Lester Pearson, behind that sunny smile, thought it was one of the silliest ideas he'd heard. With under 4 years to build Expo, that was the general view.
The press said that it was a Jean Drapeau folly, that it was a bone thrown to Quebec. It rained, that sort of thing. My name is Yves Jasmin, and I was Director of Public Relations at Expo 67. The press was generally hostile. The old rivalry of Toronto-Montreal, of course, appeared, reared its ugly head. To call it Expo makes it very French. And we had articles in the press saying that, it looks like a new brand of cigarette or it's idiotic. The symbol is, of course, absurd. My God, it's not Canadian. There's no flag. There's no maple leaf. There's no beaver. My first objective I gave myself was to convince Canadians that what an exhibition was, what an expo was, and how it worked, and how it would benefit Canada. And it was not a national catastrophe.
No, it wasn't. In fact, the scale and ambition of what was being built here would change Canada forever. But they didn't know that when they started.
My name is Paul Brake, and I can remember the frustrations for things that were going very badly, and the thrill when they all started to work. In 1964, we're working without a site. It's in the middle of the river, but it was still underwater, like the islands hadn't begun to magically appear. So we decided to take the site and we made it into maps, which we showed constantly.
In the beginning, Expo was 10% engineering and 90% marketing.
It's going to be an opportunity to take a look at the future.
Director of Operations Philippe de Gaspé-Beaubien became Expo's premier pitchman.
There's going to be restaurants at night. There's going to be games and songs. There's going to be water shows. There's going to be fireworks.
And I think we have a good chance to having one of the most unique and successful exhibitions in the history of the world.
Expo started to rise like a fairy story out of this river. And that was very exciting for people to go and look at. Every delegation from every country that was either considering coming to Expo or had decided to come had these tours as often and as much as they could absorb so they could get out and get the feeling of what was going on out there.
The delegation, led by Dmitry Polyansky, the first deputy chairman of the Council of the Soviet Union, spent some time at the Soviet Pavilion.
In the mid-60s, the Soviet Union was alien, dark, dangerous, and it was coming to Expo.
He added it will bind our countries closer together.
There was an enormous anti-Russian sentiment. I got hate letters. I got "I'm going to come up and kill you" letters that would come to me that my mail was being read by the RCMP.
This was the Cold War, and the USSR was putting up a huge building, a bazooka shot away from the huge American one across the river. Oh boy.
We wanted to intrigue the American public, and we ran a full-page ad in Life magazine, and we showed a picture of the USSR pavilion being built.
Look what the Russians are building just 40 miles from the USA. As an American, you should look into it.
It was a very shocking ad, and it worked very well.
I'd like to introduce Mayor Jean Drapeau of Montreal, who's here tonight. Let's have a fine...
And then the master of ceremonies to all America gave Expo his blessing.
Incidentally, Mayor Drapeau in Montreal will play host to 70 nations at Montreal's exposition in 1967, so we'll be up there to see you, Mr. Mayor.
There we were all told by this icon of American taste and culture that this was the greatest show in the world, and it was going to be an absolute triumph, and he'd be back in a year to celebrate. Well, that was eye-popping.
We had great breaks. We get a phone call from Macy's. He said, "We'd like to devote part of the 7th floor to Expo 67. Oh, this is great. Can you lend us some maquettes of pavilions? Oh, yes, we can do that.
We made a three-dimensional site, actual site model, which was about 20 by 40 feet. It came in giant pieces. We took the model down to New York City for 6 weeks. I think it was held over for 6 or 8 more weeks. Drew huge lineups.
Right there in Macy's, Time Travel, a guide to the dazzling future. Expo would show you Habitat by the young Canadian architect Moshe Safdie, a mock-up of life half a century ahead. And there would be science and art and magic and music and food and drink from 70 countries.
We started moving it around. We actually had other smaller ones made. They came to the 2 huge Canadian department stores in Toronto, and then they moved right across the country to Simpsons and Eaton's. It made a dream look like it might become a reality.
Some guy said that it's all very highbrow. Won't we be able to get a hot dog at Expo? I said, oh, no problem. We have that. We need hot dogs. We need all the fast food requisites. But we'll do it in a cultural atmosphere. Do you mind if your hot dogs are eaten with the strains of Strauss or something? Oh, I guess not.
But would Expo be ready? The foundations are in, the islands are above water. Now let's get to work on 51 miles of roads and paths, 27 bridges, 847 buildings, endless vats of concrete and paint and plaster. It looked absurd, impossible. But the CBC was keen. It asked Gordon Lightfoot to carry a guitar around the site and sing about it.
But now the seeds are planted and the gates are open wide. The old ways are forgotten, there's no place left to hide. And the legacy I'm leaving you's not very hard to find. You'll see it all around you at this crossroads of time. In the sweet soil it's a-growing at the crossroads of time.
The crossroads of time were only half paved, but young people across the country were starting to believe, starting to line up for the most coveted summer jobs in Canada.
Well, I saw an ad in the paper. And of course, like everybody else during that period of time, I was taken by the event and I wanted to work there. So I sent in my resume, got an interview, got the job. My name is Colette Quenel, and I was a hostess at the Quebec Pavilion. Hello, Colette.
Okay, you got to coach me here because it just doesn't come natural anymore.
My name is Kim Grabio, and I was the host at the Ontario Pavilion. Everybody, of course, in Canada was talking about Expo. It was the centennial year. There was so much excitement about Expo. And of course, my friends at university were applying as well. And I guess it was just a bit of a bandwagon effect. I thought, well, it would be just a wonderful opportunity.
I'm William Thorcell, and I was the manager of the Western Provinces Pavilion at Expo 67. I guess I was 21. I went up to the airport in Edmonton, and there was a big jet plane sitting on the tarmac. My mother asked me where the engines were because she hadn't seen a plane without propellers, and it was my first plane ride. The Alberta I left behind had that very rural, agrarian sort of culture to it. There was a strong religious bent. It was a conservative province. And I got on a DC-8 and we flew to Toronto and then on to Montreal. It was an overwhelmingly exciting experience. You saw a city, a Canadian city, that you couldn't have imagined could exist in Canada. You'd never seen a city like that before, anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Coming from Windsor, Ontario, which is a blue-collar town, you know, an automobile manufacturing city, Montreal seemed pretty exotic at the time. So the choice between working in an automobile plant and working at Expo, it was a pretty easy decision to make.
For Expo, the bars stayed open until 2:30 in the morning.
There was a boîte, you know, a disco type, what they called a boîte. And we went dancing. We were 20 years old. We went dancing in the night. We could drink by the dance floor. There were these wonderful women there, and we danced into the wee hours of the morning. It seemed like an illegal act. It seemed like it should be an illegal act, but of course it wasn't. We just saw that there was another way of living, and it was extraordinarily exciting to see that.
My name is Judy Rebick, and I was a student in 1967 in Montreal. I think Montreal was like the hippest place in North America for sure, if not in the English-speaking world then, you know. Lots of artists, writers, poets. You know, it was the height of Leonard Cohen as a poet, you know, probably the best known, but there were many, many others.
Montreal was a romaine lettuce town, and Toronto was a iceberg lettuce town. Montreal also had this very, very strange and exotic overlay of being another country and another language.
You know, it was an exciting time, artistically speaking and politically speaking.
The United States was going through a very dark period. The war in Vietnam, and they were having racial problems and city problems. So we had a feeling that we were really kind of separating in our social values from the United States. And the engine of an expo, which was a very big, powerful, ambitious, risky engine, it really served as the focus point, the funnel for our changing sense of ourselves and what was possible.
But violence was also possible at Expo. Not long before, the FLQ was leaving bombs in Montreal mailboxes.
And we were afraid that it might happen again. I had some people in my staff who were strongly separatists. I said, look, if Quebec ever wanted to become independent and ever wanted to show what it could do, it would be very fortunate to get a world exhibition. And we're getting one. And Quebec plays a very important role in it. Pass the message on, don't rock the boat.
If you did, security would be waiting. There was an elaborate, state-of-the-art command center. Some of the security preparations, though, didn't impress the international media.
5 days ago, these men were insurance clerks and cooks and salesmen and gentlemen of leisure.
Hey!
Some of them have been given a few hours weapon training and will actually carry arms. If their marksmanship is no better than their drill, visitors to Expo are best advised to take cover.
The CBC contributed travel tips.
Yes, people are going to be coming to Montreal from all over the country. Now, if you agree that half the fun is getting there, then you'll want to do so as easily and as inexpensively as possible.
People in English Canada didn't travel very much. We were not that affluent, and we didn't even travel much within Canada. I think for a lot of people, the trip to Expo 67 might have been the first time they'd been to Montreal.
Perhaps at this point, we should pass on a few driving tips. First of all, in Quebec, most road signs are in French. Nord is obvious. North, Sud, South.
English Canada, who had only ever known French Canadians as stereotypes, pea soupers and all the other kind of put-downs. Now this is a vibrant new society. This was an instance where they actually started to think, well, what are these other people? Let's go down and have a look at what these folks are like.
My name is Fred Briggs. In 1967, I was the skipper of the 25th Hamilton Sea Scouts Port Troop. Most of the kids had not had a lot of experience traveling, so we did a lot to try to raise some money to go. They were from an area that was not very well off, and getting them to see Expo would give them a much wider experience in life than they were going to get without it.
The nation's teachers got in on the action too.
On the blackboard, children, I have drawn the Expo symbol. It consists of 16 stick-like figures with arms upraised, and they are in a circular formation, indicating men joining hands around the world.
In late '66, Expo was everywhere.
The continent of Canada with things to do and see. It's a year to drive, to feel alive, learn what it means to be Canadian, Canadian, lucky folks like you and me.
This is the year to tour Canada, and to tell you how to make it the happiest time ever, here's Gordon Pinson.
Now, wherever you see this display, there's going to be a winner. So drive in and pick up your free roadshow ticket. Pull up at the Tiger Pumps, and if any two symbols are the same, one of 50,000 Kodak Instamatic camera outfits is yours. Or if all three symbols are the same, you can get one of hundreds of new CGE portable color TVs.
The tide literally turned. The whole world was suddenly talking Expo.
Spring 1967. It's only days away now. It's only hours. The mood has gone from, is it going to succeed, to, we can't wait.
You do wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, my God, this is what we didn't do, this is what we should be doing, you know, and taking notes. And it was 14 hours a day, 7 days a week was the type of work. It was exhausting, it was grueling.
The training was very intensive. We had 3 weeks of training from 9 in the morning until 6 at night. We did have makeup training. We had, for example, in the 60s, the eyeliner was very important. It was a very thick line around here and how to apply it. The rest of it was more political science, history and geography and all of these wonderful subjects.
There were hundreds of acres of grass that was laid down and turned yellow. So the horticulturalists invented a sort of a greenish mixture that was sprayed. So the grass was sprayed and it was beautifully green on the opening day.
Montreal, Canada, on the sun-filled day of April 27th, 1967.
À Monsieur Pearson qui allume.
There were huge crowds. I mean, just literally thousands of people were at the entrance waiting to get in. It was thrilling. I do recall walking across the bridge over to the, from the Ile Saint-Hélène to the Ile Notre-Dame and seeing this beautiful sight, you know, sparkling against the background of the St. Lawrence River. And I do remember Bobby Gimby's song, Canada, playing over the loudspeakers as the fair opened that day.
Three days after the opening of Expo, we had a crowd of 525,000 people on the site.
You had the feeling that the whole world had an appointment with you in your own living room, in your own backyard, and you were happy to see them there. I felt an immense sense of pride. And magic was in the air.
Canada was asserting the fact that it was unique, it was different, it was bilingual, and it was bicultural, soon to become multicultural, and feeling kind of good about itself, and feeling that we could have a party and invite the rest of the world.
And if you're inviting everyone, everyone needs a passport, an Expo passport.
And they have to have it stamped to go into each nation. What is more realistic than visiting the French Pavilion? Then you have to have it stamped by a French official at the door. My kids loved it. They loved going down. They went down almost every other day and had their passports stamped eventually at every single venue that was giving a stamp.
That idea then that we go to Montreal and we get these passports to all these places in the world, well, most of us had not been to all these places in the world. And now, the kids who went loved all those passports and said, I'm going to go to all those places in the world. And so you start seeing in the late 60s and the 70s, students going off to Europe, backpacking and so on, to actually see the places that they first may have been introduced to when they went to Expo 67.
The whole country had fallen under the Expo spell. A national migration towards Montreal was underway.
The bulk of travelers will go by train, and Canadian National warns that reservations should be made 2 weeks ahead. Air Canada is adding 5 extra flights a day and more if needed to handle the overflow.
Someone, again, had this wonderful idea of bringing in all these high school and amateur groups from all over the country. They had to come at their own expense, but they had 3 years to raise the money and come over. And then they came like the marching band from Cologne or wherever it might be. So did all the marching band's mums, dads, and grandparents, and uncles and friends.
This land is your land. This land is my land.
And away we went in the convertible. And I remember the boys in the back huddling down on the floor and holding their hats on so the wind didn't blow them away.
Canadians became aware of Canada in a sense that they had never been aware before. The enormity of it. I mean, the Vancouver people suddenly realized that between Vancouver and the East Coast, there are 4,500 miles with thousands of other Canadians in them, and vice versa.
This land was made for you and me. This land.
We went to Ottawa. We toured Parliament buildings. We went and saw the Rideau Canal, took a boat ride down the Ottawa River, and then we went to Montreal.
This land was made for you and me.
50 million people, 2.5 times the population of Canada. 50 million people came to the new Magic Islands, so those islands had to be perfect.
I think it's end of May, beginning of June. There are shadflies. They're little pesky little things, harmless, but there were zillions of them. So we poured hundreds or thousands of gallons of DDT in the river, killing zillions of shadflies, birds and fish. But we didn't have shadflies in 1967. Now it can be told, but we couldn't tell it then.
Un jour, quand tu viendras, nous t'en ferons voir de grands espaces.
At a guess, the Expo visitor spends half his time in queues, 1/4 actually looking at things, and the other quarter getting from place to place.
I remember long lineups. I think people were actually amusing us as we were standing in these very long lineups. We didn't really mind because, you know, in front of you was somebody from Alberta who you were talking to, somebody behind you from Rimouski who you would talk to in your high school French. I guess for that cosmic moment, you know, we stepped outside ourselves, our shy, deferential, and self-effacing Canadian self, and became just, you know, more friendly, more outgoing, more confident.
I'm Courtney Milne. I'm from Saskatoon. In '67, I was working as a psychologist.
Many of my friends in the States were making their pilgrimage to Expo 67, and I remember feeling this great sense of pride that it was on our home turf. And Montreal was a place I had never really visited before then.
American visitors from anywhere, were in for a surprise.
They asked very basic questions like, you know, do you live in igloos, or, you know, do some people still use dog teams here? And I had to explain to them that yes, we still did that, but only in the far north. That mainly in our cities, it was very similar to big American cities. There were many that came from the New York and Boston area, I recall. And they were quite amazed at just how different Canada was.
My name is Eckhard Kries, I'm from Germany, and my wife's name is Christa Kries. We came 1967 to Expo in Montreal. We always thought Canada was just mostly trees and forests and lakes and bush.
So Expo 67 in Montreal.
Trees, forest, bush? Try the 21st century.
We just couldn't believe it, that it was even possible to build the island there and put up big buildings and, you know, to people to come and visit. It was just incredible.
One thing Canadians loved, and they just couldn't get enough of, was the adulation of foreign countries coming and saying, like, this is the greatest thing I've ever been to. We're very prone to be negative thinkers before Expo. I think we changed our attitudes to a certain extent afterwards.
No one who visits Canada this gala summer would think of leaving without taking in the dazzling sights of Montreal's Expo 67. And that goes just as much for Her Sovereign Majesty as for any of her Commonwealth subjects.
Expo was just the talk of the world. People were coming from all over, and it was just a dream come true to be on that site.
All that summer, the stars stepped out in sunny Montreal. The high, the mighty, the talented, the beautiful, and musical royalty like Duke Ellington, and it wasn't just establishment stars.
The good thing was that it did bring visitors from the underground and state.
Like San Francisco's Jefferson Airplane, they played Toronto for money, and then they played Montreal for fun.
Part of the philosophy at the time was that they wouldn't stay in hotels. They had lots of money, but they wanted to crash with, people like them. And then they got a VIP tour of Expo, so I figured, I'll go with them because then I don't have to wait in line. But they were so crazy. They were tripping on acid all the time. By the time we got down to Dorchester Street, I got off the bus. I thought, I can't handle this at all.
I remember hosting a number of Russian visitors. One of the Russian cosmonauts one afternoon. I hosted several ballerinas from the Bolshoi Ballet. And these people, of course, were internationally recognized, and I was just a 19-year-old from Ontario. It was a humbling experience.
The amateur groups that came from British Columbia and Manitoba and Ontario and the Maritimes and the North Shore of Montreal, they were given a performing rush at that moment in their lives that they probably would never have again. And it was all happening to them, and grandmother wouldn't believe it.
Now, here he is from Expo Theater, Ed Sullivan.
The new world on the Magic Islands was full of things grandmother wouldn't believe.
Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. We're telling everyone in the United States to get up here quickly, if they can get in.
If you were a child, your future was right up there for you to see. You might go into space on a Soviet rocket or an American rocket. You could go to the moon. Wow.
My name is Stéphane Aquin. I was 7 during Expo 67. I have a few recollections of visiting the American Pavilion.
The space exhibit that dominates much of the pavilion is one of the reasons for its being among the most heavily attended buildings.
The 60s were based on the race between the USSR and the USA to conquer space and to go to the moon as fast as possible. And this triggered an extraordinary optimism among many communities around the world that the world would change, that we would expand our environment, that we would live on the moon, and it would take a few decades. We'd be there. We'd have colonies there. And this was a belief shared by many. Utopia was at the doorstep.
Wonderful things to the left of you, to the right, above, below, amazing things, fast things. None of the Hamilton Sea Scouts had been on a subway before.
It was an experience just to get on, looking at this thing and I'm going, wow, this is it's huge, and there's all these people and they're all going in the same direction. It was fantastic. It was faster than local transit, I'll tell you that much.
It was a great opportunity to open their eyes to the potential, their own potentials. This was new ideas, new examples of architecture, of all kinds of things.
This overhead rail system that ran all around the site, weaving and wending its way through the building. Someone had the genius idea of running it through Buckminster Fuller's geodesic dome, which was the American site. The mini rail went in one wall, right through the center up high, and out the other wall. And people loved that.
Everything was amazing, but the movies, the super-sized movies, everybody had to see them. You waited for hours, but you didn't mind because the movies were amazing.
I think I had grown up, going to the Roxy Theater in Saskatoon, watching the Westerns on a Saturday morning, and it was always one screen, and it was very exciting. But I had no idea that you could have surround screens, or you could have them down below you and above you and beside you.
Give us a place to stand and a place to grow and call this land Ontario. A place to stand, a place to grow, Ontario.
a place to stand had been put together in a way I'd never seen before. There were multiple images within the frame, repeating actions half a second or a second after each other, and choreographed with music. It was a sense of unbridled opportunity.
Hollywood gave it an Oscar.
I remember walking out and just seeing the bright sunshine at Expo and going, I'm in the wrong field. I'm going to go to film school. So my whole life I owe to, really, to that one day at Expo.
That summer, Montreal was the global village.
Expo 67 is an immense party, bringing together people from all over the world around a single consciousness, moment of consciousness. But it is also a party for the youth, you know, the coming of age of that boomer generation. It was a summer of love in San Francisco, but also in Montreal.
Let's be clear, that summer's love did not extend to protesters. Soon after opening day, some anti-war marchers reached the site. Demonstrations were immediately banned around Expo. The penalty, 60 days in jail or a $100 fine.
You know, the cops in Montreal at the time were just awful. You know, we hated Drapeau because, I mean, after all, the cops were under Drapeau. The government was corrupt, and all of a sudden he's being painted as a big hero because of Expo. It was so unreal, you know, it was creating a fantasy world. I mean, here was all this fancy technology, beautiful buildings, everything else. Nothing that was going on in Quebec society was reflected there. So, you know, you're out in the streets getting your head bashed in by cops in an anti-war demonstration, and then you go to Expo and it's all, la 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 la, aren't we wonderful, aren't we beautiful, you know. And there was all this stuff going on in the streets of Montreal.
Those streets, not these. These streets were non-political. One big non-political party.
There was an expression at Expo, the temps qui bouge. I think that was the official slogan for La Ronde, which was the amusement park, which means it's action time. And it really did sum things up very, very well. You know, it was a time you could get together and just over a beer or over something, you would talk until the wee hours of the morning. And I must say that that's an experience that stayed with me ever since.
I wrote back to my family, just outlining how much fun I was having. Maybe in a very unconscious way, I was trying to get my father, who was so strong in the work ethic and working all the time and only taking Sundays off simply because that was his Baptist duty, to have a little more fun in life. And, you know, it was that sense of that there is more to life than just making money and just looking after a family.
The TV set at that time was moving from black and white to color, just as Canada was moving from black and white to the color, to the openness to the other, to other ways of, to other tastes, to other flavors, other cultures, other religions, the movement to an eclecticism that would define, of course, the Canada in the last, come to define Canada in the last 30 years.
To us was like took a trip around the world. So we decided right then, when we were at the Expo, that we would like to immigrate to Canada. And that's what we did.
One day I went with my mother to the Ceylon pavilion, and what is Sri Lanka today. We ordered a tea over there, and they served us the tea in a big glass, very fancy, a very fancy way, and with tea with spice, sugar, and lemon. And it was really good, and I never saw tea being served like this because I was used at home to drink a cup of tea with the bag, inside, the tea bag inside the cup, and looking at the fancy way they were doing that changed all my life. I always have to take care of the way I was drinking tea, and today I still drink tea in glasses, and I love it.
They were playing this wonderful Cuban music, you know, the son music, which some people now are familiar with. Back in 1967, the only place you could hear them was the Cuban Pavilion at Expo. So we really got into it, you know, listening to this, the rumbas and the mambos from Cuba, eating black bean soup, and just talking about the Cuban Revolution. I ended up going to Cuba 2 years later on a work exchange program just because I was so fascinated with the culture from that experience at Expo.
Not the kind of fraternization with the enemy that would play well with one very important visitor.
United States Day at Canada's Centennial Expo 67 brings a surprise visitor to Montreal.
When President Johnson came, he sort of breezed through the U.S. pavilion, which he hated. He thought it was, you know, the queers had been at it. You know, it's all hanky-panky and nothing about Texas. Anyway, he was not amused at all.
And on U.S. Day on the Magic Islands, the world outside abruptly intervened.
Somebody phoned and said, whoever raises the American flag will get a bullet through his heart. So instead of the usual scout who would pull up the flag, it was the scoutmaster who donned a bulletproof vest and pulled up the flag, and there was a large tear in the middle of it. Accidental? We don't know. Probably somebody's idea of protest. Anyway, Newart said, pull the goddamn thing down.
And down it came, and on it went. Expo Summer for all the world to see, full of music and magic and new ideas and new feelings.
We were all feeling very proud, and we were all feeling very proud for the Quebecers too, because what they had managed to do in short order when they had had a reputation in the past of not being very technical, being lawyers and priests, etc., and now they had come and were rapidly had come past the rest of us.
Expo 67 certainly has become, in the collective, imagination of history, the moment, the defining moment of the 60s. For Canada, it was the centenary of the Continental Confederation, but also one of the great moments of the sovereignist movements in Quebec is 1967.
No single moment more definitive than when the French president, newly arrived in Quebec to visit Expo, seemed to endorse Quebec separation.
Vive le Québec! Vive le Québec libre!
Independence was in the air. The day after Général de Gaulle had said, Vive le Québec libre, was the official visit of the general at the Quebec Pavilion.
Ottawa blew up and said, you can't have him at Expo. Just tell him to go home. And we said, no, we're not political, and Général de Gaulle is welcome at Expo, and he came.
And I was assigned to walk in front of Général de Gaulle. Everybody was crazy. There's no other word for it. And it took seconds for the crowd to break the police cordon, and then the newspaper and media people were all over the place. It was a run for your life situation. Général de Gaulle never went where he should have. Nobody went where they were supposed to be. So it was a crazy situation, really.
Some people think Expo was a turning point in Canada. I think this was, a time in Quebec of incredible developments, incredible energy, incredible creativity. And Expo was in the middle of that, in the mainstream part of it. Canada was growing up then.
October 1967, cold wind, autumn turning towards winter, party's over. 50 million people come and now gone. Of course, there were speeches. Montreal's mayor would ride the Expo success to Olympic disaster and cripple his city financially.
Our Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Lester B. Pearson, speaks to all of Canada and to the world.
But after Expo, nobody had to ask anymore what it meant to be Canadian.
We have discovered that we do have a character and a quality of our own, rich and diverse, but Canadian.
I think probably Canada was starting to fall in love with itself in its own shy and, understated way, but a feeling of confidence that this could be a great country. This could be a place where, if you're the best and the brightest, you may not have to leave for New York or Los Angeles. Maybe you can do it here.
I think that it really opened my mind to the possibilities of public service and how you could work with people from other countries.
And every one of the more than 50 million of people who have moved across these grounds has become more conscious of our global neighborhood, of the fact that every man on this planet is linked to every other man.
The Canada we're in today is very much the expression of the values that Expo represented. Canada as the microcosm of the world.
There was to be no national monument like the Eiffel Tower for Montreal. Expo's legacy was change. It changed what the world thought of us and changed what we thought of ourselves.
If you went to the University of Expo and the University of Montreal, that experience, you came back with an education that would change you, I think, changes your DNA a little bit.
Thousands of people all over North America and the world have their Expo passports tucked away, and they will only come to light when they die at the age of 93 or something, and someone says, what on earth was this?